Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unpack the Hack, where we're going to be talking all things cyber insurance today. My name's Trevor Buttrum. I'm the manager of career connections at the Insurance Institute of Canada, and I'm joined by an expert panel who are going to share their insights, their expertise, and really walk through what happens in the event where cyber risk becomes a reality. And so I think it's going to be an exciting, jam-packed conversation. I know that we all have a lot of ground to cover today, so we're just going to hop right into introductions. I'm going to invite the panelists to introduce themselves, to talk a little bit about sort of your career journey within the insurance industry. How did you become a cyber specialist? And why does this excite you? What is the area that you're seeing sort of the most opportunity within this niche space within the insurance industry? And what do you want candidates and folks on the line today to really take away from the conversation? So I'm going to turn things over to you, Patrick, first to maybe introduce yourself and share those insights with our audience today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Trevor. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Great. So everybody, my name is Patrick Bourk, and I am the National Cyber Practice Leader for Hub Insurance Brokers. And let's see, what do I do? My job is very much as a broker, but in addition to negotiating terms and placing coverage on behalf of our clients when it comes to placing cyber insurance coverage, we also within our team do quite a lot of advisory work too, which is one of the kind of exciting things about cyber insurance specifically. So a lot of times after we place the policy, we'll still be engaged with the client to talk about what they can do from a pre-breach preparedness standpoint. We'll often give them advice with respect to tabletop exercises that they can do, employee hygiene training. We also do some incident response planning for clients as well, so help them to write those plans. And then also what we do if the event that our clients do have incidents or breaches, that's where we come in to act as a claims advocate as well. So it's a very interesting area of insurance, really unique and constantly moving. And as all of my guest panels can attest to, a busy time as well. By way of background, so I joined Hub about 3 years ago. The firm I was with was acquired. Most people join Hub that way. And prior to that, I was with a boutique insurance broker since about 2007. And I have always been on the specialty side of things. So I started my career really with the D&O, E&O, tech E&Os, crime, those sorts of placements. Prior to being a broker, I was on the underwriting side. I was part of a claims team that would handle all form of specialty type claims. And prior to that, I was in the private practice of law. So I'm a lawyer by background. I was called in '99, practiced for a while, and as I like to say, found salvation in the world of insurance, and am now a recovering private practicing lawyer. But there's certainly benefits to it, and I'll let the others speak here in a moment there, Trevor. But the background that I have from law and from claims handling has been really helpful in the cyberspace because cyber policies are very unique and quite they're different and they're very nuanced. And so as part of a claims team and as part of a underwriting support role where we would actually write policy wordings, it's really helpful to have a sense of how all the policies work. And then the other component, again, my background in claims and in law, that's helpful when the claims actually happen, because how claims are handled, and as we'll discuss today, it's quite different. There's a lot of moving parts to it, and speed is really, really important as well. So having familiarity with all of the incident response participants is important too, and my background has certainly helped with that.
Patrick, I really appreciate that insight off the top, recognizing that this niche space is unique within our business, and that, backgrounds and expertise and sort of what each of us bring to the table are important into the overall sort of ecosystem. So as you talked about, your career didn't evolve sort of in this linear way. It actually took more of this squiggly line. And it's an analogy as a career practitioner that I really love, because I think it showcases within this industry how we become subject matter experts, how we become
Absolutely.
sort of niche specialists is by building and capitalizing on a collection of skills rather than defining ourselves as an it, right? And so that
Very,
we
very
have,
true.
yeah, this chance to just to kind of apply that in this unique context. So I think that sets the
Yeah,
stage really well for our conversation. I want to invite those on the line with us today. As we move through, there is the Q&A feature within Zoom. You can start to feed us questions. This is going to be a dialogue. I want to make sure that we get to those throughout the conversation. Please feel free to make use of the chat as well if there's something that you think would be helpful for us to touch on or zero back to as we move through each of the conversations with our panel today. Greg, I want to turn things over to you and to hear about your journey within the cyberspace and to hear a little bit about how you've emerged as sort of a niche boutique firm in this space and really delivering service to clients. So, Greg, take it away.
Sure, thanks so much. And Patrick and I have a lot of similarities in terms of background, with the exception of me being a recovering private practice lawyer. I also started in the insurance industry in 2007, straight out of business school, actually. And I got a terrific foundation working for a large domestic insurer, which fast-tracked through my CIP. Ended up doing my FCIP and my CRM as well within the first couple of years of joining the industry. So I focused pretty heavily on education and as well. I started off in an underwriting program that taught us the ropes in a windowless conference room, being, reading insurance textbooks, which is any undergrad's dream job, I'm sure. But honestly, it gave me a foundation that's prepared me for everything that I deal with on the day-to-day today. So from business school to undergrad, from undergrad into insurance school. Then I started underwriting P&C, just general P&C, for about a year. And then an opportunity came up to focus on the specialty market. And I jumped and I moved internally within the insurance company and started underwriting D&O, E&O, and crime, just like Patrick had mentioned, before moving to the brokerage side. So I moved over to the brokerage side in 2010. And spent 7.5 years on it. And I also spent some time at Hub. I was a voluntary joiner of the Hub, to the Hub team. But Patrick's right, hell of a team, amazing firm when it comes to M&A. It's really impressive. Have a lot of lifelong friends that I worked with there. Before getting an opportunity to start Ridge Canada. And Ridge Canada is a boutique. So all we do is cyber, and we underwrite on behalf of syndicates at Lloyd's of London. And hopefully in the short, not so distant future, some additional products with some domestic backing as well. So teaser alert.
That's great, Greg, and I really appreciate it as well as you were speaking, talking about how the foundational insurance technical knowledge and expertise that we find in the CIP or CRM programs, or licensing, kind of equipping us with the table stakes, if it were, to build on top of and layering that knowledge and expertise to be able to move into these niche areas. I think that they serve as that foundation and really give us sort of the toolkit that we can draw on when we're in these unique kind of scenarios and places to be. As well, appreciated sort of as you were speaking about, the intersection and interdisciplinarity of roles that you've had the chance to do. So having these kinds of different vantage points is actually really helping you in terms of being able to shape your practice as you start to bring more and more products and clients on board. So thanks for that in terms of sharing that insight.
My pleasure.
Michael,
Happy to be here.
awesome. Michael, I know that you're coming to this conversation from, you're the person when we call when risk has become that reality, and would really love to hear how your journey in the claims space has sort of evolved to be, now this almost base camp of operations when a cyber event starts to become live. So can you tell us a little bit about how you started in the industry and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Michael Guy. I'm with Charles Taylor Adjusting. I've been with the firm for about 11 and a half years. When I started writing notes, because you said, let's do a bit of a bio, I started trying to figure out how many years I've spent in the industry in total, and I stopped counting when it hit over 20. So it's been quite a long time, but it's been an amazing journey. So similar to Greg, I came out of business school and went straight at attacking my CIP, my FCIP, and CRM. And then carried on and did some continued studies at the university level, all around risk and risk management, and continue to do so. So I'm a lifelong learner. Just finished another institute course, and what I like to do is keep abreast on new offerings and new products, and I think that keeps it fresh, so that we're not getting into routines or mundane work days. My career has been, I started my career in Ontario. I spent almost 20 years working out west in Calgary, and then returned to Ontario about 5 years ago. It was great. I got a lot of exposure to the specialty market, similar to my colleagues, but in the claims space. And I had a special focus on an interest in crisis management type policy. So looking at, triaging, environmental losses, and that allowed me to leverage and pivot right into cyber, which, because it has a first party, a third party, and a triage component, it was interesting and exciting. And when cyber started to get good take up in the marketplace, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to pivot my skills from other areas in specialty markets into handling cyber claims. But to do so, you don't have a roadmap, and you don't have a book that tells you how to do it. And the policies were changing kind of on the 6-month rotation, and wordings were changing and being created. So it was really interesting. At that point in my career, I probably had more conversations with underwriters than with examiners, and got to know the legal community a whole lot better, as everyone was trying to navigate and figure out what the policies were designed to do, what they were actually effectively doing, and what the right response was. So it was an amazing time. So I've been in this space for about a decade, but really officially when it's branded cyber for the last 5 years, and I sit as the national head of cyber for Charles Taylor Adjusting, and part of a global team. The way that I got my knowledge up was attending conferences, seminars, webinars, reading books. Most of the early books were penned by either IT professionals or lawyers in the space, trying to talk about what the risks were and how the insurance industry was going to respond. And it got a bit repetitive, I guess. There was a lot of decisions that still needed to get discussed. But the more conferences you go to, the more networking you're able to do, the more people you're able to meet, and the better foundation that you have to be able to be recognized as as a responder from the claims side of the business. It's slightly different than traditional claims. You don't get a first notice of loss and get, read a policy and take your time through it. You're expected to know what you're doing. You're expected to know the products beforehand. And it's, we brand it slightly differently. The front end triage is incident management, and then it leads into claims adjustment sometime thereafter once you get through the triage phase. So that's me in a nutshell, and how I fell into cyber, I guess.
Thanks, Michael. As you were speaking, my adult educator hat went on for a minute, and I could hear about the informal learning opportunities that you were taking advantage of. And often that's how we stay at the forefront of game changers, right? It's just by reading articles, by engaging in conversation, by attending conferences, by building a living library of expertise that we can kind of draw on and pull out and utilize each and every time that we may need it to help us inform our practice. it's nice as we become more formalized in this space, knowing, I know at the Institute, we are launching a cyber course, for example, as a part of the CIP program. It's becoming more formalized, but I think it is, that these kinds of conversations, these kinds of events where you can kind of get your feet wet and then kind of build your knowledge to that place where taking, the more formal pieces that are out there will make sense for you. And really appreciate too that it's been layering claims knowledge and realizing that the role does look a little bit different here, and knowing that you have that in your back pocket to be able to draw on, I think is amazing. And I think all three of you have alluded to how each of these roles, you're reliant on other parts of the insurance organization to be able to both put a policy into place, but also to respond to it effectively. So, kind of flipping or working in different ways than perhaps you would in a more traditional operational environment. So all really cool to hear. We're going to set a stage now for a cyber event that's fairly common, unfortunately, in terms of being a reality. So business email compromise, so BEC, and kind of talking a little bit about sort of what that looks like. Greg, I wanted to have you set, we're going to take about 10 minutes now to sort of set the tone, and then I'll do in-depth kind of conversations with each of you in terms of how you would respond. But Greg, wanted to kind of get your perspective, if maybe you could lay the foundation. What is BEC?
Sure. So business email compromise, or BEC, is a fancy way of saying that someone's broken into your email system. It's typically done or orchestrated in a few different ways, but the most common is someone sends a link or an email with an attachment or a link in it that isn't recognized, that's embedded with some sort of malware. And malware is obviously synonymous with a computer virus. What happens is someone within the organization clicks on it and opens up a vulnerability within the email system. So in a nutshell, that is boiling it down to a very simplified way of doing it. It's really what happens after the business email compromise that defines the scope and severity of the incident itself. And it can go a few different ways. So business email compromise, can be something like rerouting emails internally or externally, or it can be using the email compromise through phishing. Like, that is a phishing attempt really at its core. But if as soon as that vulnerability is exploited, it can be pivoted. The threat actors that deploy it can go a couple of different ways. What we're seeing a lot of right now is threat actors leveraging business email compromise to try and execute social engineering fraud loss. And that is where the organization voluntarily parts with funds. So people are being duped based on emails. The emails are being monitored in some cases. There's elements of that. Another way that business email compromise can affect an organization is with the rerouting of those emails. They can be siphoning off confidential information or any information that contains personally identifiable information. And then the third way, which is probably the most dangerous right now, is ransomware being leveraged as the first sort of scoping / drop component into a full-blown ransomware attack against the entire organization itself, which can be absolutely devastating. But business email compromise, it can be, it's a flexible attack pattern. Let's call it that.
Sounds like there are lots of different ways that it can wreak havoc within sort of our environments, and it's seemingly really innocuous and then having devastating impacts across our organizations. Michael, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, in terms of setting the stage here, you obviously hear from people when this has happened. How does it most commonly occur? What does it look like?
I think Greg alluded to this, that business email compromise can be so many different things. So if you just consider that you get an email with a link and you open it up and it wants some credentials and you put those in, you've now given somebody access to to control your inbox, essentially, in its most root fashion, aside from the other elements of whether it drops malware or not. And that is the reason it's so prevalent is it's easy. There's no coding required. All the other person has to do is send you an email from their end and direct you somewhere to provide information, or clicking a link and taking you there where they then spoof a page where you think you're going and logging into something that is legitimately related to your business activities, but you're providing someone else with a whole bunch of credentials and login and access information. And so because it's easy and doesn't require coding, and there's potentially not always a malware on the front end, it doesn't usually get picked up by antivirus. So it's an email coming in with a link. Some systems do, some don't, but I mean, every system that picks up a problem, the threat actors are going to find a way to get around that door and get in. So that's generally how it happens. And they can be used for a number of different platforms, as Greg started talking about. One is you could be just simply looking to get fraudulent funds transfers going, and you're just in there collecting information and then spoofing emails to other members of your organization and getting them to route funds somewhere. That's pretty simplistic. But you could also use it as a launching. If there's nothing in the inbox you gain access to, it is now your launch point to the entire contact list that you can then do other phishing campaigns to get other credentials. And the threat actors are amassing information and putting that in their criminal pocketbook so they can figure out how to monetize that at a later date.
So it sounds to me like what we're really seeing quite a bit of is sort of almost impersonation or infiltration into the organization, giving people the opportunity to feel like, oh, this is a safe kind of thing that I'm supposed to do, or this is an action that I need to take. There's some urgency here and I need to be able to respond to it. And unfortunately, it's either equipping with information that can be used later or actually triggering and cascading a series of events that could have detrimental impacts. So yeah, it sounds that there's so many ways that it could kind of manifest, and then you're kind of in it. And so it sounds like it could literally happen to anyone.
And there's lots of stats, and it's hard to know which ones are the most accurate. But I mean, I picked off an FBI stat this morning that said 50% of all cyber losses are related to business email compromise. And then they monetized that to be $1.8 billion in 2019 alone.
Yeah,
that's just the US
to take that number in, 1.8 billion.
Yeah, as soon as you hear that out loud, you're like, this is a considerable problem. And it's not just large organizations that are being targeted here. It's some of the folks that feel like, oh, I'm relatively safe for a small firm. There's nothing that could happen to me, and risk does become that reality. Patrick, I wanted to sort of close the setting the stage here with a little bit about the lines of defense or industry response that we have in place. Can you tell us a little bit about how the industry responds to these kinds of threats and risks?
Sure. Differently, and it's all evolving. So, both Michael and Greg spoke to, business email compromise as being a threat vector. It can pivot and go in so many different ways. And I think the challenge for the insurance industry is to try to continually keep on top of that. How the industry has to respond is to be constantly aware of all these things so that policy wordings can be adapted. And that's where it's really also important to make sure that the insurance carriers that clients place their coverage with are what I would consider committed insurers, those who know what they're doing, those who have been doing it long enough, those who have the bandwidth and the knowledge to know how to handle claims, because it's a real challenge when you're dealing with a policy with inadequate limits or the carrier is just not one that is known, quite frankly, for having cyber capability. But the one other thing I just wanted to mention that, again, and because email compromise can go in a number of different ways, a policy form may or may not respond to different ways. So I'll give you an example, and this is something Greg and Michael will be familiar with too. Social engineering fraud, which Greg made mention of, is about voluntarily distributing funds to someone you think is legitimate, but turns out not to be. So right away in the insurance industry, we've had to come to grips with what kind of policy would actually respond to that. You know, as I like to explain to clients, crime policies are about money, cyber policies are about data. So even though it's a cyber threat actor, hacker person, the moment you mention the word money being taken out, some cyber insurers are going to stop you right there. Say, sorry, there was no data lost. It was about money. You got to go knock on the crime carrier's door. Then, unfortunately, in knocking on the crime carrier's door, they said, well, did the employee steal it? Were they involved in this? And the answer is no, they were just tricked into sending the money out the door, but it was stolen. You say, well, a crime policy is typically about employee dishonesty. Unless there was a manifest intent to steal it, there's no coverage. So right away, you hit a gap in coverage. Now, thankfully, we either have crime carriers that will endorse their policies, or we have cyber carriers that will provide for social engineering fraud coverage. So that's all fantastic. That you can see how the industry is pivoting and responding. But nowadays, we're starting to see, as Michael and Greg made mention of, a new variant. So what happens when it's the email is compromised, the threat actor cases the joint, figures out who all your suppliers are. Now they start sending emails to your suppliers pretending to be you. The supplier then pays that money. You follow up with the invoice and they say, what are you talking about? I already paid your invoice. And he says, no, you didn't. All of a sudden we find out that a threat actor is involved. Is your policy going to respond to any kind of that? So there are so many different nuances with business email compromise, and it's important to step back, analyze it all, and figure out which policy might be able to respond, which coverage range within a cyber policy might respond. All those things are important considerations. It's something you have to be careful in when you place these policies, and you don't want to kind of dabble too much, shall I say.
Yeah, exactly. And entirely to that point too. Where is the coverage? If to Patrick's point, it's your client systems that are accessed in an unauthorized manner, and the joint is cased and everything's being set up, and now they're asking suppliers to change banking information. Let's say you find out about it. You're an executive at the client level, and you find out about it. Now you've got different obligations. There's the potential for regulatory piece, but first and foremost, you've got to cauterize that wound. You got to make sure that you're not sending any more correspondence out to your clients, your suppliers, your vendors, anything like that. So you've really got to get on top of it. And to Patrick's point about getting on top of things, speed is paramount, because speed helps prevent a lot of dollars going out. And from a claims standpoint too, I mean, I'll let Michael comment on this, but these are not just turnkey, simple things to remediate. The forensics that need to go in, you've got to find out where did those emails go to? Who was that? That costs that can be expensive. And what we're finding is those costs are going up. So not only are organizations being targeted more, and not just targeted, like the whole point about this too is, we've got some clients that I think, and they're not being targeted per se, they're just sort of cannon fodder. And unfortunately, it's, they're in between a large organization, or they're providing services into a larger organization who is the target. And their systems, like small businesses, they don't have the budget of large enterprise type of clients. So you're automatically, whether you're a target or not, you might not be the target, but you're certainly the weakest link in the chain that has access to systems. And so instead of trying to dupe or spend time and case the joint of the large enterprise, they're just blowing right through Canadian small business. And Canadian small businesses are not immune to this. We're looking at claims right now, and these guys will laugh because I had to jump off for 2 separate calls between a lawyer and our claims folks immediately before getting on this presentation. It's how things happen. It's if you're looking for a career that's certainly avoids the mundane, every day is very different, but it's, I often get asked, like, how do you sleep? And, there's some nights that you don't. So it's, how is this going to happen? And it's just a fact of life, and it's a reality when you're working in this environment. So it's still not quite as bad as private practice law, though. So.
Absolutely. And I think, you talk about the multifaceted response, the speed, the need to be able to understand sort of the complexity or the nuances of what's happening, being able to get on top of it, and to be able to really be that trusted advisor and guide people through what they need to think about and what they need to handle in each of these scenarios. One of the questions that came through in the chat, just wanted to get your perspective before we move into actually unpacking the hack a little bit more in detail and getting more into sort of these kinds of conversations. The question was, do we need business interruption insurance for both, crime and cyber? So, you talked about sort of the crime side, Patrick. Do we need business interruption on the cyber side as well?
So my answer to that is absolutely. In fact, there was a statistic that it came out through Advisen, and I think it was Allianz that posted it, that about 62% of the losses that they are dealing with involve business interruption loss. So I would say that business interruption and contingent business interruption, another really important component, is very important to an insurance policy. And that helps to direct some of the questioning around limit adequacy as well, because you hope that a system that needs to be remediated, as Greg said, it's not necessarily an easy task to do. If you're in a situation where the system can't work for a week or two, that's a pretty simple calculation to do based on annual revenues and what the loss could be. So business interruption, very important, but again, also important to understand the nuances of it. So as I like to explain it to clients, in the original world of cyber policies, which of course are changing on a daily basis, you'd have business interruption that was really designed as cyber attack shuts down system, you cannot generate revenue, you now have a loss that a policy can respond to. And then what started to happen is the clients would say, well, what if we are outsourcing to a cloud provider? What if we have an outsourced IT department that we work with, and they're the one who has the cyber attack? We can't function without them. Can we consider that outside IT vendor part of the policy? And over time, you started to see some insurers say, sure, we'll do that. Then they started to say, well, what happens if we have a non-IT provider that we rely upon in our supply chain? So we're a manufacturer, and we're dependent on these third-party hauling companies to deliver stuff. What if they have a cyber attack? Because it's all going to ripple down to us. Again, we're starting to see insurers look at that kind of coverage too. And then the final iteration is, what happens if in any of those 3 scenarios, it's not a cyber attack, but it is simply an interruption in our network system, short of an act of God or a public utility going down, but our system just fails. Perhaps there's a missed patch or something like that. Can we get coverage for that? Again, some insurers will do it, some won't. So all in all, business interruption, very important, but then it's also very important to dive into the details of what the business interruption coverage can be and find out what carriers best to align with for it.
Yeah.
Business interruption definition has been the critical component in looking at the wordings. It's not tried and tested like a property policy would be. And there's variations of it, and every insurer has their own sort of slight change in whether in the way in which they offer business interruption coverage. So Patrick was spot on in saying you need to look at it in depth and make sure it's designed to do what you need it to do. You don't test drive it in the middle of a claim. That's the scenario, because that's where you will be left with the exposures that you thought you had but don't, and usually those are monetarily significant.
Yeah,
and I think yeah.
No, go ahead,
Patrick.
Greg.
Well, I was just.
Yeah, no, you go ahead.
It was only that I wanted to tack onto that, and Michael will be very alive to this, in that it's important to keep track of everything as the incident is going on. And that's where, the skill set and the help of an adjuster can come in and say, look, you got to be tracking this stuff as you're trying to rebuild your network system and you're out all these various costs. At some point, we're going to have to put that into the hands of the insurer. And the prettier we can make that look, and the tighter and the more defined, the better chance you're going to have success under your policy. So that all then speaks to the preparedness piece, which is important as well. Sorry,
Exactly.
Greg, go ahead.
And Greg, we're gonna go right into preparedness, because I want to hear from you about this. What does BC preparedness look like? What are some of the strategies that need to be put into place? And Patrick alluded to some of the types of coverages, but what are some of the things that we need to do to be ready for this kind of attack? And what do we need to be advising those that we work with, if we're a broker or if we're a underwriter or claims folks in this space? What do we need to be talking about in terms of being ready?
Sure. And I think it's, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, the actual loss ratios in the industry this year are pretty telling. That, you look at the OSFI numbers, and you look at it, you break it down between the foreign insurers and the domestic insurers, and nobody's making money when you collectively look at the whole thing. So, it's been a pretty good run in a soft market relative to pricing. Pricing is always going to be important, but at the end of the day, there are certain things that just, we need to see happen across the entire industry. And these measures, like if we back up and look at it a little bit more esoterically, is these measures are minimum hygiene requirements for Canadian companies to help prevent their hard-earned dollars from fleeing the coop and going outside of our borders. Most of these losses are being paid to international criminal syndicates and criminal gangs. So, we are seeing some activity inside of our borders, but by and large, these are Canadian businesses that are losing money, and it's going outside of Canada. So this is a collective effort that is going to have to happen. The insurance community can push and recommend and nudge as far as we can, but ultimately this, everybody needs to be taking this seriously. So until we get a hygiene standard, this is just relatively, it's guidance. It's really just guidance. And I commend some of the broker partners that we work with, like the Patricks of the world too, who really know this world and eat, sleep, and breathe it, and are advocating with their clients to really raise the bar and make sure that Canadian companies are well protected. I think the insurance industry has a critical role to play right now. It's similar to when you were looking at driving without seatbelts, and then the insurance industry said, no, you got to put seatbelts in the cars so people stop dying when these types of things happen. Exactly to your point, Trevor, about some of these minimum controls that we can look at from a very preventative maintenance standpoint. So there's a couple of things, and we really started to see some of this movement as a result of COVID. You look at COVID as, there's a bunch of memes going on right now. It's like, who's affected the most change within your organization in the last year from a transformation standpoint, CEO, CFO, or COVID? And it really is fairly true. I mean, with the migration of work to work from home, the reality is a lot of the cyber wars, or if that's what you want to call it, I'll refrain from using the word cyber war because there are coverage implications to that. So cyber battles that companies are facing, are waging, are at an endpoint now. People are working from home. So you really have to figure out, how do you protect your endpoints? You got to figure out, how do you secure your backups, and how do you really take them offline, so that in the event of a business email compromise that transposes into a ransomware event, that you're able to recover and remediate without having to come to the table to potentially negotiate with a threat actor. And then so the multi-factor authentication at the bare minimum for people logging into these remote working circumstances. If I'm a betting person, I'm seeing that come in as a minimum underwriting requirement in 2021. It's free. It's not expensive. In most cases, it's free. Not in all, but from an email standpoint, yeah, bare minimum. And it's a click of a button and then a little bit of training. Beyond that, training, we're seeing training being very effective now that people are working from home. They're not under supervision. It's a little bit, you're playing the phone tag or Zoom tag or Teams tag, whatever you want, however you want to call it, with finance departments, with HR departments, with everything else. You can't just walk down the hall and say, oh, hey, so-and-so, did you ask me to authorize this transfer of funds? Or did you send me this email? What do you need me to do on it? Those aren't possible anymore. For the most part. So having effective controls and measures in place to deal with that. And I would say, like, the backups piece, really, take them offline. Or if you're using cloud backups, make sure that your backups are segregated and protected and completely inaccessible from your traditional networks. And then lastly, the training component. And fortunately, a couple of years ago, I think the Canadian government, the feds under the Liberal government, actually did a very big service to Canadian businesses. And they looked at, how do you enable some of this cyber training? And so there was budget assigned to it. So I think there's I think the feds have their hands full right now with some other education and protective measures that need to go in place a la pandemic. But I really think that the training element needs to permeate through, all the way down through to every organization and every user of networks, or anyone that's logging on to networks within an organization. Those are three minor things that we've seen be very, very impactful in reducing the severity of these ransom claims. Now, a business email compromise that again, I'm focusing a little bit on ransomware. From a BEC standpoint, again, MFA, or multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, prevents a whole lot of business email compromise. So some of these risk management strategies don't have to be expensive nor robust. It's just hygiene. It's really hygiene.
I think that that's one of the things that I wanted to get at, Greg, is that there's a lot of misconceptions out there as you're talking about this hygiene piece, and making these recommendations from a risk management perspective. If I'm a broker or an underwriter who's saying, that these need to be your bare minimum standards here, how do you get the buy-in? Like, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that are out there about this? Like this, to me, it sounds like that it's relatively easy to be prepared and ready, and relatively low cost. Can you maybe debunk some of the myths? Yeah,
for sure. But I think this is a perfect question for Patrick, because he's front lines with clients all day, every day. But I would say the biggest misconception that we see is either it used to be, hey, we're not a target, so we don't want any of the, like, we don't have to do any of this stuff. To cost. It always comes down to cost.
The one where some people say, I thought we had it.
Yeah, those are always nice ones, but unfortunately not in a claims scenario.
Exactly. Patrick, any other sort of recommendations that you would have just to kind of clear up the misconceptions here? Like, what do folks need to be doing?
Well, and to Greg's point on the sort of misconceptions, I mean, I've been doing cyber placements for probably about 10 years. And 10 years ago, with my first placement, it was for a company that, handled data. They had an E&O component too. They needed the coverage, but chatting with anybody else about it, they say, "Oh, Patrick, you're just trying to sell us more insurance. We're good. We've got the greatest IT system around." And you'd fast forward a little bit later, and they said, "Tell me what that thing is again." "Oh yeah, no, we're still good." But what's happening now, and talk about, sort of myth debunking, if you will, this isn't an IT thing anymore. It is very much on the radar of the management team. So we get a lot more risk managers, CFOs, general counsel saying, look, the senior management team are picking up the newspaper every day and reading about this. So, we got to put this in place because they're now in the crosshairs. We haven't had any successful lawsuits against boards of directors as it relates to cyber incidents in Canada yet. And in the US, they've certainly seen those sorts of claims. I don't think there's been a whole lot of success on the plaintiff side yet, but it's only a matter of time. So debunking the myth, this isn't an IT thing. It's most definitely a senior management concern. Back to the point about small business, the threat actors are agnostic. They don't care who you are. They don't care how big you are. Their whole mission is to take whatever they can and monetize it. And it is the modern smash and grab, which is why, as both Michael and Greg can appreciate, a lot of the initial demands that get made can often be haggled down to, sometimes half the amount of the demand. Unfortunately, demands are getting higher, but that's because they don't really want to hang around. They just want to get paid and get out of there. So, so I think that's another issue. Everybody's a target, and when you're a small business provider, an interesting statistic from a survey that was done earlier this year from the Scientia Institute, they reviewed 56,000 claims from 30,000 different over 10 years, and an interesting statistic was that for a global, like, multinational billion-dollar revenue type organization, the anticipated loss of revenue for them associated with a breach is equivalent to like 0.000003% of their revenues. In other words, they've actually got the balance sheet to handle some sort of an incident. But if you're a small business, even like a couple $1,000, you're a small provider, the chances of an incident, it's more likely to eat at least 25% of your annual revenues. So all the more that it really should be the focus on smaller organizations who may not have the balance sheet and may not have the robustness of network security to be able to have the proper protection. So that's another thing that we like to explain to our clients too. And from a costing standpoint, that's very interesting. It's not a mature market really in Canada, and so the pricing can be a little all over the board. But we are seeing pricing starting to go up. But insurers are reluctant to jack pricing because they still want to be competitive. So to balance off what they need to get in order to repatriate their 132% loss ratio in Q2 of this year, is they are asking a ton more underwriting questions. I'm working with a client right now. It's about a $500 million manufacturing type client. We've got some indications, we've got some indicative terms, but it's come with a list of about 13 different questions that the client's going to have to answer. So we're finding that to be, very much on the front burner these days when it comes to placement.
Yeah, it sounds to me like that what we're seeing is sort of like we don't want to necessarily price ourselves out of the market, but we want to make sure that you're as prepared as you can be and doing as much of sort of the mitigation and maintenance as you can be as an organization before we take on this kind of risk. So
it's exactly right.
I think that that's it sounds like a few lessons learned the hard way by the insurance organizations and by companies themselves. I wanted to talk to you, Patrick, about the timeline. So let's break that down for folks on the line. So BC has happened. What are the next kind of steps in that? What does the event actually look like typically?
Sure. So when these sorts of things happen, we first of all hope, and insurers hope, and the incident response community hopes that they get a call right away. We've talked a lot about speed and speed being of the utmost importance. Whether it's a large event or a smaller event, and this is where the broker gets to really shine. When as a as a former claims person, I always say this is where you win the client forever, because how you can handle a claim is really, really important. So the timeline and who all gets involved, I'll typically take that first call from the client. I'll ask them to tell me over the phone what's going on. I'll ask them to be succinct about it. I don't want them to send me an email about it, because we don't want to make a record of everything going on quite yet. What I'll typically do is immediately call the insurer, if they have a policy, of course, and I'll reach out to either the cyber underwriter or the specialty cyber claims person, whoever is designated within the insurance company to be spoken to, and say, look, our client's in the middle of an incident. They need assistance, and being a lawyer by background, I'm a little bit biased. I always like making that first call into the lawyers who can assist and start talking the client down off the ledge, and especially do their best to secure whatever they can under solicitor-client privilege too. So I will reach out to the incident response providers. We've got all their home numbers and their cell phones, and where to track the carrier pigeon and everything to get a hold of them right away. Get them on the phone, tell them to call the client. The client is right now in a taxi cab freaking out as they're speeding, to the airport on it. Talk to them right now and get involved. And so then you get the incident response professionals involved in the process right away, at which point, as the broker, and I'll usually have a claims person in my office as we're doing all this, if we can, back pre-COVID, of course, and then we'll formally file the claim with the insurance company. So I think Michael alluded to as well, this is triage. It's not sort of traditional like, hey, we'll file the claim with we'll call the 1-800 claim and file the claim and wait until they file 3 days later before they'll get back to us. It's really important and critical to get all these different participants involved. So that's a little bit about the timeline, and that's a little bit about the participants who get involved.
And Michael, from your perspective, what are some of the key considerations in a DUC claim? How do they differ from other types of claims, for example, property or E&O?
I think Patrick raised something earlier where he talked about, the various component parts of the policy, and that's critical when you're dealing with the investigation side. First off, you need to know who was impacted, how they were impacted, and stop the access. And I think Greg mentioned that earlier as well. And then you need to triage damages. But once you figure out who and how, and you really have an understanding of how long they've been in the system, what they've been looking at, what information may have moved around, the social engineering side of it is only one component of the policy, and you can't just go to reimbursement and move on. There's all of the other investigation that now needs to be happening, and they're parallel, because the loss of money may be hugely critical to this company if it's money that has gone out and their operating accounts can't handle it. Smaller businesses, as Patrick mentioned, will go belly up if you can't get money back in their operating accounts. So that needs to be ongoing, but you also need to figure out what other information might have been exfiltrated or looked at or viewed or moved out to other accounts. This becomes really problematic in that triage phase. And protecting it under privilege is hugely important. So having legal counsel involved is phenomenal, but some of the businesses won't make decisions unless they have the insurer rubber stamp, or they have someone on the in the incident management adjusting team saying, yes, you can proceed with that. And we get that line with the insurer. That allows counsel to be working directly, providing advice, and everyone's doing their component part to make sure that this moves at the right speed and there's no gap or delay in the time that you're spending assessing it, making decisions, and providing clear instructions to the policyholder or to the affected client. That's the big win. And then the triage of damages they're first party and third party. So you have totally different considerations on how you want to manage each one of those components. And I think the way that the file handling and the incident management has changed over time is there was a real reluctance early on when counsel became involved, because they have a relationship with the client, and information trickling out to the insurers and the underwriters took a little bit of time, and therefore you weren't able to provide immediate policy response, and that left a lot of uneasiness. And there's a lot better camaraderie in the industry now, where we all know each other. So there's a level of trust, and you know what conversations I'm going to be allowed to be part of as an insurer representative, and which ones I'm not going to be part of. And now we understand what information should be shared on each one of those calls. And counsel will drop off if we're having an hour-long conference call. I sign in late. They may drop off early and allow me to have a coverage conversation with the client, and it's becoming much more seamless. And I think that's the response is the key consideration, not only the investigation side, but the management of all the stakeholders.
It sounds to me, Michael, like one of the things that I'm really hearing is how much things run in parallel as opposed to being handed off and waiting and then handing it back again. It's actually how much can we actually get done by all moving up the rungs in different ways, taking a look at each of the sort of criticality of what needs to be dealt with. And rather than dealing with it in sort of an order, we're maybe dealing with it across the board and having different teams or different groups respond based on the criticality or the issue that's kind of coming through. So just really hearing from each of you has been amazing in terms of the timeline, the intersectionality, the interdisciplinarity, as well. One of the key differences being, as well, just the range of professionals. Like when you think about all the different things each of you are saying are important, both in the setup of the policy as well as in managing the event while it's in play. And also even pre-game, the preparedness kind of piece in terms of all the roles and responsibilities that need to be taken into consideration. So thank you for that. We have about 5 minutes left in our time today, and there are quite a few questions that have come in. This is going to be a bit of a rapid fire round, so I'm going to go to one of you, and if you've got something to add, please feel free to add it. But Michael, I just wanted to ask you in terms of response, one of the questions that was like, if organizations have a breach coach or an incident response partner, is that enough, or do you actually need more than that to be in place within an organization to be able to respond to kind of claims and process?
I think you need to understand who is part of your both your incident response team and your insurance value chain. And all of those groups have to be connected together. So it's great that there may be an already pre-selected breach coach, and that's fantastic. And you have a plan that you're going to execute. All of that preparedness certainly helps. But knowing who's going to be, and having FaceTime with who might be your incident manager, and having a relationship with your underwriters and most definitely your brokers really helps in the time of need, because that's connecting all the dots that are external to your organization.
Great, thank you for that. And I think, we're also highlighting sort of almost how much more integrated the insurance professional is into the heart of the organization in terms of needing to understand what's going on for their client to be able to make the appropriate recommendations. So that's great, thank you. One question that came up, and Greg, perhaps I'll go to you with this one, was with the ever rising cyber attack incidents globally, has cyber insurance become a profitable line yet for the insurance industry?
So previously it was, until this year.
Okay.
And I'm just talking anecdotally, focusing on Canada. Globally, we're looking at, you look at different markets and the viability of those markets, and some of the, the other thing that you have to keep in mind is the evolution of legislation in all of these jurisdictions as well. And a couple of years ago, we had the GDPR come in for the EU, which levies heavy fines and penalties against clients that, or against end businesses that don't comply with the legislation. Canada's under PIPEDA, for the last, since the Digital Privacy Act gained royal assent and went into place on November 1, 2018. Fines and penalties weren't really, like, they were more focused on small business, like up to 100K really wouldn't move the needle on a Facebook or an Amazon or anything else. So but the 100K it's not non-compliance, but a $100K fine or penalty could really, really hurt a small business. We haven't seen that really play out. The government's been very good about working, and the Office of the Privacy Commissioners have been very good about working with Canadian companies that have had these types of incidents, unless there's some sort of blatant disregard for reporting. But then you look at California, New York, and the financial institutions. You look at Australia, which is really struggling with respect to insurer profitability in that jurisdiction. You look across the gamut right now and across the globe, and the markets the remark that Patrick made earlier about the markets really still developing and adding premium in, that being putting downwards pressure on rate. Absolutely, it's 100% the fact. And so I still think that in order for this entire ecosystem and industry to be profitable long term, that hygiene bar needs to come up. And so a lot of it right now is still education and awareness. I mean, you've got a few people that have been transacting in this space for a long time, collectively between Michael, Patrick, and I. And, you know, personally, I've never seen it be this bad. So, and that's just across the board. That's not specific to Ridge Canada. I mean, we're having a great year. So it's, yeah, I just, in general, hygiene needs to come up if we want to be writing this for a long time.
And it sounds like where it fits into the overall ecosystem is that if there's greater peril if we don't offer this kind of coverage to our clients, then perhaps if not, you know, in order to make it profitable, we need to work together. But we could see them wiped out entirely if they don't have sort of the hygiene requirement or even the coverage to be able to cover, you know, these kinds of incidents should risk become a reality. So thank you for that. Patrick, wanted to kind of turn things over to you for this final question that I think we'll take. Does the crime policy and cyber policy, does it have extensions, endorsements, and floaters like property policies, or is it more of a standard product? I have a gut reaction, but yeah.
So crime policies will typically be endorsed to add some sort of social engineering fraud coverage to it. Cyber policies, you'll have some carriers that will build it straight into their policy. Some will endorse it too, but I would say that more are started out as a specific coverage grant. If you don't mind, Trevor, there was a question that I want to answer because I didn't want to leave anybody misrepresent anything. I think it was one of the questions was, what do you mean it's not an IT thing? It's a senior management thing. Do you mean it's no longer IT's responsibility to keep their data safe? It's the senior management's responsibility to make sure they are protecting all aspects. So I just wanted to answer that. No, IT still very much plays a valuable role. And unfortunately, the IT department is sometimes left holding the bag, so to speak, and it becomes all their problem. But I know of certain, in fact, forensic IT specialists who get that call at 7 p.m. to help out. I know one in particular, Greg and Michael know him too. He's actually testified on behalf of IT professionals who have been fired for not manning the breach to say, this is not their day job. This is like, you know, asking a family doctor to go in and perform brain surgery. It's not fair to expect that all IT professionals could do this sort of thing. So the IT responsibility is there, but what I mean by it being a management issue is that there are now suits against the management team for saying, hey, what kind of policies and procedures did you have in place? Were you even discussing what you should be doing at the management table? Management team, have you built an incident response plan? Do you know who to call when you have an incident? Have you even given any thought? And if the management team says, well, haven't really thought about it. I got my brother's an IT guy. I suppose I'd call them if I had a problem. That's not going to be a good enough answer for the management team anymore. So that's what I mean. Everybody gets to share in the responsibility.
Absolutely. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head. When there's an emerging issue within the insurance industry these days, it seems to be a broader issue than just the specialists. Like it needs to be a broader organization-wide kind of thought
Yeah,
process. So whether it's talent, it's not an HR issue, it's actually the organization needs to be looking at it as a whole. If it's an IT or cyber issue, it is not just the IT department that needs to be caring, it's the whole organization that needs to take part in putting
yeah,
policies and procedures into place to protect
absolutely.
against these kinds of issues. So I think
Very true.
we're having much broader conversations as industry professionals than I think we ever have before, particularly in these emerging areas of risk for our organizations that we work with. So that's great. I wanted to close with one question that came up, and you can also weave in a final thought or key takeaway for our folks on the line today. But what has been the most interesting or most complex cyber event that you've ever come across? And maybe just a final thought about cyber for folks. Michael, we'll start with you.
Good. I was hoping, and I'm hoping it's not one of mine.
Well, I think I'm going to remain quite quiet on the most interesting because many of them are still live. So the problem with the more interesting ones is they cascade across multiple sections of the policy, and they're really crippling for a business. So they have a long tail, and they definitely have litigation associated with them. So unfortunately, that might be a conversation over a cup of coffee, not over a recorded webinar. Sorry, everyone. But one final thought from me is, if you have interest, jump in. It is still a very new sector of the insurance industry. It is changing rapidly and responding to what the market conditions are. So it's never too late. What we were doing yesterday isn't what we're doing today. So take a chance.
Awesome. That's great advice, Michael. Thank you. Greg, what keeps you in the cyberspace, and what's your final thought for folks?
Well, I'm pretty invested in it now, but other than monetary means, I mean, it is, or monetary reasons, excuse me, it is, it's fulfilling. I mean, again, it's no 2 days are the same. Similar to Michael, I've got a few open items that are very, very interesting, but just the dynamic of, I'll leave this one thought, which was, it's cost benefit analysis and whether or not you're even going to negotiate with a potential threat actor when you have to weigh in what is your potential business interruption loss, how long would it take you to rebuild everything, and then weighing all of that. So if you like math and you like getting into the annals of some problem solving, the cyber industry, cyber claims, cyber underwriting, cyber broking, very much probably a worthwhile endeavor. Last thoughts is to what Michael said earlier too. Stay eager. The continuous learning aspect. I'm still learning every single day, keeping a finger on the pulse on what's going on globally, what's happening to our, the economics behind everything right now, what's happening to Canadian businesses that are suffering in the middle of a pandemic and then being hit with a malware pandemic at the same time. So it's fascinating. It's constantly changing, and it's very, very fast paced. So if that's for you, to Michael's point, jump in.
Fantastic. Patrick, final word to you.
Sure. It's interesting, Greg's example of that cost benefit analysis on a ransom attack and whether or not to pay the ransom or not. We dealt exactly with that, and the number we were talking about was $5 million, and whether or not they were going to pay $5 million. And the call CFO that I had over the weekend when it was taking place was he was great to deal with, very measured, but I am waiting to get the number on Monday, find out if it's cheaper to rebuild the system than to make a $5 million payment or not. So interesting stuff there. Final words, I would echo all of that. It's an exciting area. I think outside of encouraging teenage daughters to become forensic IT specialists and become billionaires overnight, given how much in demand they are, the broking space is really exciting. And I think, from an insurance broker standpoint, it's exciting on the underwriting side. It's exciting on the incident response side too, with what Michael is doing. But it's a real chance to, at least if you're on the broking side, you're not just selling a policy. It's not transactional, it's advisory. So it's your chance to sell the policy, but you're also selling all the things that go around with it. And I think as professionals and as insurance professionals, that's really exciting and bodes well for the insurance industry.
All of you have shared such fascinating kind of perspectives and vantage points on this area of business. And I think that, regardless of where we sit in sort of the insurance community, we know that cyber is influencing and shaping our space in truly, to use the word of the pandemic, unprecedented ways. And I think, it's a key driver of modeling, the nimbleness, the responsiveness, and the cool factor, if you will, of what insurance can be in terms of a career and career pathway. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. And Patrick, Greg, and Michael, certainly, again, we really appreciate the expertise and the insights that you've shared throughout the panel conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Happy to participate. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks to the Institute.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Recording will be available and shared with you, and certainly wish you a great day. Thanks for being a part of the conversation today.
Excellent. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.